Paul Brunton's Spiritual Journey. Part 1. Reflections on my life and writings and my first initiation into the Overself. I take a look at my own life. The unwinding reel of the years turns more and more hastily as one gets older. Such is the perishable stuff of existence. 'Tis all a mental construction, a tissue of ephemeral ideas. And yet the years have not been irrevocably lost. I have tried to rescue from the vanished past, perhaps before it got too late, bygone impressions, unusual adventures, inspired moments, exotic ideas, half-felt intuitions, and newfound truths, and then turn them into written sheets. Thus 10 books have successively been born, and thus my own recollections and reflections have been given out to a larger audience than myself. It is a fact that the fundamental motive which inspired their creation was service. They have effected their purpose, for thousands of people have testified to the benefit received from reading these books and to the solace gotten from dwelling on their ideas. Sometimes I wrote for the ordinary reader, sometimes for the extraordinary one. If A Search in Secret India and A Search in Secret Egypt did not tire the brains of many novel readers, The Hidden Teaching Beyond Yoga and The Wisdom of the Overself did constitute a doctrinal construction which attracted only the few who felt such a need. Some of my earlier work will continue to stand by itself, but the rest may serve as an introduction to the more substantial work presented in those 2 volumes, The Hidden Teaching Beyond Yoga and The Wisdom of the Overself. I have drunk deeply of doctrines that have been left like a legacy out of Asia's past. Asiatic and African mystics, yogis and learned men, and even rare sages of whose eminence and existence the West still knows little or nothing, have given me their confidence, confided much of their knowledge and secrets to my care, and sent me forth from their presence with their uttered benediction to mediate between East and West. The books performed the much-needed service of carrying encouragement to those aspiring individuals who most need it, who are struggling to live mentally in a more exalted ethical environment than the one in which they live physically. They inspired and stimulated even while they instructed. They were to become both refuge and guide to those who would rescue life from aimlessness and save a few really worthwhile hours from its moth-like impermanence. It is unlikely that any recognition of my research work or creative efforts will come from official quarters. The task which destiny set me was too unusual for that. I do not write for those who would sit philosophy in an academic chair, but for those who would apply it to life. I have consistently and frankly made it plain, both in the prefaces to certain books and during the course of personal interviews, that I have no desire to set myself up as a spiritual teacher, and consequently no desire to acquire a following. I do not regard myself as a holy man, or a saint, or a sage, or anything of that sort, and consequently cannot honestly permit readers to regard me as such. If I write about some of my own mystic experiences, it is only to show what benefits I myself received from the pursuit of yoga. This is done because I know that an effective way to persuade some of my fellows to adopt meditation practices is to relate them to personal life. We'd like to take a moment to share the images of some of PB's teachers. Wang Yangming is the author of Instructions for Practical Living, the most important Chinese philosophic classics since early 13th century, and in my belief, after 50 years of studying his sayings, letters, and writings, He is one of the great Chinese sages. P.B. Alan Bennett, Ananda Metteyya, was one of P.B.'s early teachers and one of the original Westerners to become a Buddhist monk. He is the author of The Religion of Burma. From the introduction, the whole of the powers of this remarkable man were devoted to one single object, to the exposition of the Buddhist Dharma in such a manner that it could be assimilated by peoples of the West. Brother M., surname Thurston, was an American artist living in London. He led a group in the early 1900s called the Brothers, and his few publications bear their imprint. Ramana Maharshi, When Heart Speaks to Heart, What Is There to Say?, was written by Ramana to P.B. V. Subramanya Iyer. My dear Mr. Iyer and teacher, I am devoting 1939 to the work on the true Vedanta, which is urgently needed in the West. Your cooperation will be of inestimable value, and I hope you will do me the honor of accepting the dedication when it is completed. Unquote. P.B. I have thus had several teachers, yet could become the pupil of none. I have studied the tenets of several schools, but could become enslaved by none. In obedience to an inner compulsion and an intermittent premonition whose justification became quite clear as destiny unfolded, I have ever maintained a sacred independence amidst all such relations, a detached loyalty, and have considered truth a goddess above all mortals and hence alone to be worshipped. This attitude brought me painful emotional conflicts during the period of my growth, and provoked others to malicious misunderstandings. But it has finally and fully proved its worth. For my loftiest, strangest, most significant, and most elevating mystic experiences occurred before I had ever met a single teacher, before I even set foot on Asiatic soil. Through them, I was really reborn. But alas, in my youth and novitiate, I could not understand them. I was dazzled by the light, and so continued to grope, as though I were still in the dark. Now, at long last, I have brought my mystic and philosophic wandering to an anchor. Henceforth, I owe intellectual allegiance and mystical obedience to no man. And if I abhor the thought of forming a cult and making disciples, this is not to say that I abhor the thought of assisting my fellow man to find something of what I have already found. For no one can come into even partial comprehension of the soul, which I call the Overself, which supports the existence of all living creatures, and continue to sit smugly in self-centered enjoyment of his knowledge and egotistic enjoyment of his peace. It is only ascetic mystics, who touch their inner self without also touching the inner self of the universe, who can do that. But he who has even begun to perceive that the basis of his own individual being is one and the same, wholly identical, with that of all other individual beings, is no longer a mystic. For him the ultimate unity of all humanity, secret and not obvious though it be, is nevertheless a fact, and he has to reorder his own life accordingly. It will not be possible for him to dismiss from his mind the melancholy case of those who aspire to a wiser and better life. They will haunt his heart like wraiths, and he will not get free of them, go where he will, be it into the loneliest solitude or the busiest city. Their service becomes his inescapable duty. My first initiation into the Overself. The reluctance to put this in writing arises partly because it touches private, intimate, and sacred moments, and partly because it will necessarily be so prolific in first-person pronouns that it will sound far too egotistic. But I know from wide experience that such a narration will help those who are already seeking the Overself to recognize certain important signs on their own way, to learn where the correct path should lead them, and above all, to confirm them in the necessity of hope. I believe, too, that it may give those who are not questers, but ordinary people, more faith that God does exist and more trust in the ultimate beneficence of God's world idea. I communicate these inner experiences to those who might be helped, and to those who might receive more vision of and more belief in life itself. Before reaching the threshold of manhood, and after 6 months of unwavering daily practice of meditation, and 18 months of burning aspiration for the spiritual self, I underwent a series of mystical ecstasies. During them, I attained a kind of elementary consciousness of it. If anyone could imagine a consciousness which remains in its own native purity, a happiness beyond which it is impossible to go, he would have the correct idea of the soul, which I call the Overself. Beauty was understood in a larger and deeper way, and there was a shallowness of earthly pleasures in comparison to the Overself's beauty and goodness. Yet this special detachment did not prevent me from enjoying nature, art, and music to an even greater and more satisfying extent than previously. The detachment gave me freedom and release from some personal limitations. The glamour and freshness subsided in 3 or 4 weeks, but the awareness of them remained for 3 years. I met an advanced mystic in Europe who told me that I was near the point where I could advance to the next higher degree of illumination, but most aspirants undergo certain tests before they succeed in gaining the degree. He was right. I underwent the tests soon after and failed so miserably that I lost the spiritual consciousness I had previously possessed. The period that followed was a terrible one, a dark night of the soul, through which I struggled for another 3 years of pain, with no capacity to practice meditation, nor inclination to sustain aspiration. To be continued in Part 2. Quotes for this video were taken from The Notebooks of Paul Brunton, Volume 8, Reflections on My Life and Writings, Chapter 1, 2 essays. Please subscribe. Paul Brunton, 1898 to 1981, a best-selling British author of a dozen books, spent much of his early life researching the original sacred teachings of Western and Eastern spiritual traditions. He traveled the world to discover and communicate with Christian, Kabbalistic, Vedantic, Buddhist, Taoist, indigenous, and Sufi masters. Blending the richness of his own spiritual experience and inquiry with these ancient and contemporary teachings, he developed a philosophy and path of practice that suits life in the 21st century, one that expresses the greatest wisdom and love available to humankind. Regardless of how it is named, we each have a divine soul, an overself or higher self, that is with us here and now, waiting to be realized. Paul Brunton's writings are a source of deep spiritual guidance for all those interested in living a divinely inspired life.